The world is not fair. It is a fundamental truth of the universe, one that most people are fortunate enough to learn gradually as they grow. Izuku Midoriya learned it at the age of 4. The glowing X-ray pin to the doctor's light board showed a small foot with 2 joints in the pinky toe. In the era of quirks, the next stage of human evolution, that extra joint was a death sentence to one's dreams. It was the biological marker of the mundane, the obsolete, the quirkless. You should probably give it up, the doctor had said, his voice terrifyingly casual, devoid of the world-shattering weight his words carried. Izuku's mother, Inko, had wept that night, clinging to her son and apologizing over and over again. But apologies couldn't bend steel or summon fire. Apologies couldn't make him a hero. Yet, deep down, beneath the crushing weight of reality, beneath the sorrow and the endless bullying, there was a strange sensation Izuku could never quite explain. Whenever his emotions spiked, whenever he was truly terrified, or furiously angry, or overwhelmingly desperate, his blood felt hot. Not just warm, but boiling, as if molten lead were trying to force its way through his veins. He had always assumed it was just adrenaline, a phantom reflex of a quirk he would never possess. He didn't know that the doctor was wrong. That extra joint in his toe wasn't a sign of evolutionary regression. It was a biological failsafe. A lock on a door that humanity was never meant to open. Because Izuku Midoriya was not empty. He was overflowing. Since you're all third years, it's time for you to think seriously about your future, the homeroom teacher announced, waving a stack of career aptitude papers. The classroom of Aldera Junior High sat in mild apathy. I'll pass out handouts for your future plans now, but you're all pretty much planning to go into the hero course, right? The classroom erupted. Teenagers all around Izuku threw their hands into the air, showcasing a dazzling, chaotic array of quirks. Fingers elongated, small bursts of water shot into the ceiling, and one student's head temporarily turned into a stone block. It was a symphony of superhuman potential. Izuku kept his head down, shrinking into his seat. He slowly raised his hand, hoping to go unnoticed in the sea of flaunted powers. Yes, you all have wonderful quirks. The teacher laughed. But using your powers in school is against the rules, Sensei. Don't lump us all in the same group. The arrogant, grating voice cut through the noise like a serrated blade. Katsuki Bakugo leaned back in his chair, his feet kicked up on his desk, an infuriatingly confident smirk plastered across his face. I'm not gonna be stuck at the bottom with the rest of these rejects, Bakugo sneered, not even bothering to look back at the glaring students. That was uncalled for, Katsuki. One student yelled. Yeah, Bakugo merely scoffed, small sparks popping like firecrackers in his palms. You all should shut up like the extras you are. I aced the mock test. I'm the only one at this school who could possibly get into UA. I'll surpass All Might and become the top hero out there. The teacher, scanning his clipboard, hummed. Oh yeah, Midoriya, don't you want to go to UA too? The classroom went dead silent. Then, it exploded into raucous, mocking laughter. Izuku flinched, his shoulders hiking up to his ears. There's no rule against it. He stammered, standing up defensively, though his knees knocked together. Some people have gotten in without. Before he could finish, a deafening crack echoed through the room. A blast of heat and kinetic force slammed into Izuku's desk, throwing him backward onto the floor. Bakugo stood over him, smoke rising from his right hand, his crimson eyes burning with absolute contempt. Listen up, Deku, Bakugo growled, using the childhood nickname that meant useless. You're even worse than the rest of these rejects. You're completely quirkless. You think you can rub shoulders with me? No, wait, Kaken. Izuku scrambled backward like a crab, waving his hands frantically. I'm not trying to compete with you or anything. Believe me. It's been my dream since I was little, and there's no harm in trying. Try. Try what? The entrance exam? Bakugo sneered, stepping closer. You'd take the exam just to fail. What the hell can you do? Izuku looked away, his throat tight. What could he do? He took notes. He analyzed. He watched. He existed on the sidelines of a world he was desperately in love with. Later, after the final bell rang and the classroom emptied out, Izuku remained at his desk. He was packing up his things, his hand lingering on the cover of his notebook, titled Hero Analysis for the Future No. 13. He smiled softly to himself. He needed to go home and organize the notes he took on Empty Lady's debut fight that morning. Suddenly, a hand snatched the notebook from his grasp. "We're not done talking yet, Deku," Bakugo said, flanked by two of his lackeys. "Kaken, give that back," Izuku pleaded, reaching for it. Bakugo didn't even look at him. He clamped his hands over the front and back covers. A loud sizzle filled the air, followed by the acrid smell of burning paper and ozone. Izuku yelped as the notebook was charred, the pages blackened and smoking. With a careless flick of his wrist, Bakugo tossed the ruined book out the open third-story window. "Most top-tier heroes have stories about them from their school days," Bakugo said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low, calm register. "I want the shine of being able to be called the only student to make it into UA from this mediocre city public middle school. I mean, I'm a perfectionist." He placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder, letting tiny tendrils of smoke drift from his fingers, singing the fabric of Izuku's uniform. "So anyway," Bakugo smiled, "a cruel, hollow thing. Don't apply to UA, nerd." Izuku was frozen. The heat in his veins was there again, that phantom boiling sensation, rising in his chest. His fists clenched at his sides, trembling. He wanted to speak. He wanted to shout. But the paralyzing fear that had been conditioned into him over 10 years clamped his jaw shut. Bakugo turned to leave, but paused at the door, glancing back over his shoulder. "If you want to be a hero that badly, there's a quick way to do it," Bakugo said casually. "Believe that you'll be born with a quirk in your next life, and take a swan dive off the roof of the building." The world seemed to stop spinning. Izuku's breath hitched. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the room. Bakugo's cronies chuckled nervously, but Bakugo merely held up a palm, letting a small explosion pop, daring Izuku to say something. Izuku said nothing. The walk home was a blur of misery. Izuku had retrieved his notebook from a koi pond outside the school, startling the fish as he fished out the soggy, burned remains of his life's work. "Stupid," he muttered to himself, walking through the shadowed concrete of a city underpass. "Stupid jerk. What if I really jumped? What would he do then? That's instigation of suicide." He stared at the ruined notebook, tracing the scorched letters. His mind drifted unbidden to his father, Hisashi Midoriya. His father had taken a job overseas when Izuku was very young. All Izuku really knew about him was that he had a fire-breathing quirk, and that he occasionally sent money home. Sometimes, Izuku wondered if his father stayed away because his son was a defective quirkless failure. "No, stop thinking like that," Izuku scolded himself, slapping his cheeks with both hands to snap out of the dark spiral. "I have to keep going. I have to smile. Like him." He forced a wide, artificial grin onto his face, mimicking the symbol of peace. "I'm fine." He laughed aloud into the empty tunnel. "Because I am he." A wet, sloshing sound echoed from the manhole cover behind him. Izuku froze, the hair on the back of his neck standing on end. He turned slowly. The manhole cover clattered away, and from the dark depths of the sewer, a massive, gelatinous mass of dark green sludge erupted outward. It smelled of raw sewage, stagnant water, and rotting garbage. Two bulbous, yellow eyes swiveled wildly within the fluid mass, settling on the paralyzed boy. A medium-sized invisibility cloak, a gurgling, distorted voice vibrated from the sludge. A jagged row of teeth formed in the center of the mass. Perfect. Before Izuku's brain could even send the signal to his legs to run, the monster lunged. A heavy, wet impact knocked Izuku onto his back. Suddenly, thick, foul-tasting mud was forcing its way up his nose and down his throat. It was freezing cold and suffocatingly heavy. "Don't worry," the sludge villain cooed, his voice vibrating directly against Izuku's eardrums as the sludge completely encased him. "I'm just taking over your body. It'll only hurt for about 45 seconds. Then, it'll all be over." Izuku clawed desperately at the fluid wrapping around his neck and face, his fingernails digging into his own skin in his panic. His lungs screamed for air, but every time he tried to gasp, more sludge poured in, choking him. "I can't breathe." His vision began to blur, black spots dancing at the edges of his sight. The world was fading. His limbs felt like lead. I'm dying. I'm actually going to die here. Tears pricked his eyes, mixing with the foul sludge. Somebody, please, help me. Just as the darkness threatened to consume him entirely, the manhole cover blew completely off its hinges with a metallic shriek. A massive, towering figure burst from the sewers, moving with a speed that defied the laws of physics. Fear not, young man! A booming voice echoed, reverberating off the concrete walls with the force of a thunderclap. For I am here! The sludge villain shrieked in terror. All Might? The gargantuan hero pulled back his arm, the muscles bulging with impossible tension. Texas. Smash! The punch didn't even connect with the villain, but it didn't need to. The sheer wind pressure generated by the strike created a localized tornado within the tunnel. The sludge was blown apart instantly, splattering against the walls in 100 different directions. Izuku felt the crushing weight lift, a massive rush of air filling his burning lungs as he was thrown backward. His head cracked against the pavement. The last thing he saw before slipping into unconsciousness was the towering, golden silhouette of his greatest idol, standing victorious in the dim light of the underpass. Izuku woke up to a massive hand slapping his cheek with the force of a drum beat. Hey! 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 Izuku's eyes snapped open. He gasped, scrambling backward like a frightened animal. Standing over him, hands on his hips, a massive, shadow-obscured smile on his face, was the number one hero. Ah! Good! You're awake! All Might boomed. Apologies. I didn't mean to drag you into my villain hunt. I usually don't make mistakes like this, but I was in high spirits in a new city. Izuku couldn't breathe, but this time it wasn't because of the sludge. It was pure, unadulterated shock. All Might. In the flesh. Right in front of him. The villain? Izuku stammered, looking around wildly. Safely contained. All Might held up 2 large plastic soda bottles, inside of which the sludge villain swirled angrily, trapped. Now, I must be going. I need to get this fellow to the authorities. Wait. Already? Izuku scrambled to his feet, his mind racing. I need an autograph. Where's my notebook? He spotted the ruined, soggy notebook on the ground and snatched it up. He opened it, only to find a massive, sprawling signature already taking up a 2-page spread. He already did it? Izuku screamed, bowing furiously, at a perfect 90-degree angle. Thank you so much. It will be a family heirloom. I'll protect it with my life. Ha! Well, I must be off. All Might crouched down, the concrete beneath his boots cracking under the immense pressure of his leg muscles winding up. Stay out of trouble, young man. Wait! Izuku yelled, reaching his hand out. I have to ask you something, but All Might was already jumping. The hero launched into the air like a missile, driven by a sheer, irrational desperation, a desperate need to know if his life had any meaning at all. Izuku threw himself forward. He grabbed onto All Might's leg just as the hero left the ground. The wind hit Izuku like a solid wall. The skin of his face flapped violently, his eyes watering as the city shrank to the size of a model toy beneath them. Hey, hey, hey! All Might yelled, looking down in shock, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth, a detail Izuku completely missed in his terror. Let go! Your fanaticism is too much. If you let go now, you'll die. If I let go now, I'll die. Izuku screamed back, burying his face into the fabric of All Might's pants. Good point. All Might grunted. He altered his trajectory, scanning for a safe place to land. He spotted a tall commercial building and aimed for the roof. With a heavy thud, they landed. Izuku immediately collapsed onto the roof, his legs turning to jelly, hyperventilating as he tried to comprehend the fact that he was just flying. Good grief, All Might sighed, wiping a hand across his forehead. If you knock on the door downstairs, someone will let you out. Now, I really must be going. Wait! Izuku pleaded, pushing himself up onto his knees. No! I will not wait! All Might said, turning away, smoke beginning to inexplicably rise from his massive frame. Can someone without a quirk be like you? The words tore out of Izuku's throat, raw and desperate. He closed his eyes tightly, bracing himself for the answer. People think I don't have a chance, Izuku continued, his voice trembling, the dam of his emotions finally breaking. That I'm just a useless Deku. But I want to save people. With a fearless smile. I want to be the greatest hero, just like you. He opened his eyes, expecting to see the towering symbol of hope looking back at him. Instead, he saw a skeletal, emaciated man in extremely baggy clothes, coughing up a terrifying amount of blood. Izuku shrieked. Who are you? Where is All Might? You're a fake. An imposter. I am All Might, the skeletal man sighed, wiping the blood from his chin. He sat down heavily against the roof's railing. You know how guys at the pool suck in their gut to look buff? I'm like that. Izuku's jaw hit the floor. His entire worldview was fracturing. A fearless smile, huh? All Might muttered, looking down at his bony hands. He pulled up his oversized t-shirt, revealing a horrific, sprawling mass of scar tissue that seemed to encompass his entire left side. It looked like a crater of mangled purple and red flesh. 5 years ago, a villain did this to me, All Might said, his voice quiet, stripped of all its usual booming bravado. My respiratory system is nearly destroyed. I lost my entire stomach. All the surgeries have worn me down. Right now, I can only do hero work for about 3 hours a day. The rest of the time, I look like this. Izuku stared, horrified. 5 years ago, was that when you fought Toxic Chainsaw? You know your stuff, All Might chuckled dryly. But no. That punk couldn't have done this to me. This fight was kept under wraps. The world can't know. The symbol of peace must be a pristine, undaunted idol. I smiled to hide the fear inside, young man. It's a brave face I put on when the pressure is high. All Might let his shirt drop, looking directly into Izuku's wide, tear-filled eyes. The pity in the hero's gaze was heavier than the sludge villain's grip. Pro heroes are always risking their lives, All Might said, his tone gentle, yet unyielding. Some villains simply cannot be beaten without power. So no, I honestly don't think you can become a hero without a quirk. The words struck Izuku like a physical blow. The boiling heat in his veins vanished, replaced by an absolute, freezing numbness. If you want to help people, become a police officer, All Might suggested, standing up and walking toward the roof access door. They get mocked because the heroes capture the villains, but it's a fine profession. It's not bad to dream, young man. But you have to consider what's realistic. The heavy metal door slammed shut. Izuku was left alone on the roof. The wind howled around him, cold and indifferent. He didn't know how long he stood there. His mind was completely blank. The notebook in his hand felt like a lead weight. Realistic. That was the word everyone used. The doctor. His mother. Bakugo. And now, the man he had worshipped his entire life. It was over. Slowly, mechanically, Izuku walked down the stairs of the building. He wandered out onto the street, his eyes unfocused, staring at the pavement. He didn't know where he was going. He was just a shell, emptied of the one dream that had kept him going. Boom! A massive explosion rattled the windows of the street. Izuku blinked, pulled from his stupor. He smelled smoke. He heard the screaming of a crowd. Without thinking, his legs carried him toward the noise. It was a habit born of years of chasing hero fights. He pushed his way through a throng of onlookers, stepping up to the police tape. The shopping district was a war zone. Fires raged in the storefronts, thick black smoke billowing into the sky. And in the center of the inferno, towering over the pro-heroes, was the sludge villain. Izuku's breath caught in his throat. How? All Might had him. Then, Izuku remembered grabbing All Might's leg. The sudden jerk. The wind. The bottles must have fallen out of the hero's pockets. This is my fault, Izuku realized, a sickening wave of horror washing over him. I did this. He looked at the pro-heroes. Death Arms was trying to lift a piece of rubble. Kamui Woods was hesitating, his wooden body vulnerable to the fires. Empty Lady was complaining that the two-lane street was too narrow for her to use her giant form. They were all standing back. They were all waiting for someone with a better quirk matchup to arrive. Why aren't they doing anything? Someone in the crowd asked. The villain captured a middle schooler, another replied. He's using him as a meat shield. Izuku's eyes darted to the center of the sludge mass. Through the dark, swirling fluid, he saw a flash of spiky ash-blonde hair. He saw a school uniform. Then, the sludge shifted, and Izuku saw the boy's face. It was Bakugo. Bakugo, the boy who had tormented him for 10 years. Bakugo, who had told him to kill himself just hours ago. Bakugo was thrashing wildly, setting off explosions that only fueled the fires around them, but he couldn't break free. The sludge was pouring into his nose and mouth, suffocating him. For a brief, agonizing second, Bakugo's crimson eyes locked onto Izuku's green ones. There was no arrogance in Bakugo's eyes. There was no anger. There was only sheer, unadulterated terror. He was begging for help. He's going to die, Izuku thought. And the heroes aren't doing anything. They're waiting. But he doesn't have time to wait. The freezing numbness in Izuku's chest vanished. In its place, that strange, dormant heat flared to life. It didn't just boil this time, it erupted. It felt as if a match had been dropped into a powder keg within his very soul. Before his brain could process what he was doing, before the logic of being quirkless could stop him, Izuku Midoriya ducked under the police tape. He sprinted forward. Hey! Stop! You fool! Get back here! Death Arms roared, reaching out, but his fingers only grazed the back of Izuku's uniform. Izuku's legs moved on their own. He had no plan. He had no weapon. He just knew that he couldn't stand there and watch someone die. What do I do? What do I do? His mind raced, pulling up pages of his charred notebook. Page 25. Weak point. As he neared the villain, Izuku ripped his heavy yellow backpack off his shoulders and hurled it with all his might. The bag spun through the air, the zipper flying open. Pencils, textbooks, and a heavy pencil case flew out, striking the sludge villain right in his bulbous yellow eye. Gah! The villain shrieked in pain, his grip loosening just enough. Bakugo gasped for air, coughing violently. Deku? What the hell are you doing here? I don't know. Izuku screamed, his hands tearing desperately at the thick, foul-smelling sludge. It was like trying to dig through wet cement with his bare hands. My legs just moved on their own. You looked like you were asking for help. For a fraction of a second, Bakugo's eyes widened in genuine shock, but the moment was fleeting. The sludge villain recovered, his eye regenerating in a matter of seconds. You again! The villain roared, recognizing the boy from the underpass. You little brat! I'll kill you both! A massive tentacle of sludge whipped out, striking Izuku squarely in the chest. The force of the blow was devastating. Izuku heard his own ribs crack as he was sent flying backward. He hit the burning pavement hard, skidding several feet. Before he could even attempt to stand, the sludge was on him. The villain didn't bother trying to possess him this time. He just wanted him dead. The sludge enveloped Izuku entirely, lifting him into the air alongside Bakugo. The fluid forced its way down Izuku's throat, crushing his windpipe. The pro-heroes yelled. The crowd screamed. All Might, hiding in his skeletal form among the onlookers, clutched a bleeding wound on his chest, cursing his own uselessness. Izuku's vision went black. The pain faded, replaced by a strange, echoing silence. Am I dead? Izuku wondered, his thoughts drifting lazily in the dark. I guess Kaken was right. I am useless. Foolishness. The voice did not come from Izuku's ears. It reverberated through the very core of his being. It was a voice older than quirks, older than the cities of men. It was deep, resonant, and carried an undeniable, crushing weight of authority. Izuku opened his eyes. He was no longer in the burning streets of Tatooine's shopping district. He was standing on a barren, ashen wasteland. The sky above was a churning vortex of crimson and deep purple clouds. Lightning, the color of dried blood, arced silently across the heavens. And everywhere he looked, there were swords. Thousands upon thousands of swords, of every make and model, were driven into the ash-gray dirt. Great swords, katanas, claymores, and rapiers, all rusted, all broken, marking a battlefield of unimaginable scale. A mortal vessel, fragile and unbroken, the voice rumbled again. Izuku turned slowly. Seated upon a massive throne made of jagged black obsidian and intertwined blades was a figure out of a nightmare. It was a knight, but not a human one. It stood easily 9 feet tall, clad in armor that seemed organic, resembling the carapace of some demonic insect, yet forged of twilight steel and crimson accents. From its back protruded 4 insectoid wings, folded elegantly like a cape. 2 massive, swept-back horns crowned its head, and its eyes burned with a cold, piercing blue light. Resting against the throne was a sword of monstrous proportions. The blade was immense, jagged, and fleshy, with a hilt that resembled a twisted ribcage. Izuku fell to his knees, his entire body trembling. The sheer, oppressive aura radiating from the entity made it difficult to breathe. It was a power so absolute, so primal, that human instinct screamed at Izuku to grovel. Who? Izuku stammered, his voice barely a whisper. What are you? The demonic knight leaned forward, resting a gauntlet hand beneath its chin. I am the waking nightmare of the underworld, the entity spoke, the words vibrating through Izuku's teeth. I am the rebel. The Dark Knight. I am Sparda. And you, boy, are my blood. Your blood? Izuku whispered. I don't understand. Am I dead? You stand on the precipice, Sparda replied, his burning blue eyes narrowing. Your human frailty gives way. For centuries, my bloodline has thinned, diluted by the mortal mutation you call quirks. Your father possessed but a spark of my fire. But you, in you, the blood runs thick. So thick that your fragile human genetics suppressed it, locking it away to keep your mortal body from tearing itself apart. Izuku's mind reeled. Suppressed? The extra joint. The quirklessness. It wasn't because he was empty. It was because his body was acting as a containment vessel for something else. You are dying, boy, Sparda said bluntly. The mud creature crushes the life from you. Tell me, why are you here? Why did you throw your life away for the one who torments you? He was dying, Izuku answered, his voice shaking, but finding a sudden, desperate strength. I had to. Why? Sparda challenged, standing up from his throne. The ground shook with his every step. He towered over Izuku, a god judging a mortal. You possess no power. You are a deadweight. To throw yourself into battle without the strength to win is not bravery. It is suicide. I know! Izuku shouted, tears springing to his eyes, glaring up at the terrifying demon. I know I'm weak. I know I'm a deadweight. But I couldn't just watch him die. A hero. A true hero is someone who saves people with a smile. I want the power to protect them. Power, Sparda mused, looking down at the boy. You desire power. Not to rule. Not to destroy. But to protect. Sparda reached out, his massive, clawed hand hovering just over Izuku's chest. My sons fought over this very concept, Sparda said, his voice softening just a fraction, hinting at ancient sorrows. One sought power for power's sake, casting aside his humanity. The other embraced his humanity, and found true strength in his heart. You, Izuku Midoriya, possess a heart worthy of my legacy. The demonic knight withdrew his hand. He gripped the hilt of the monstrous flesh sword next to his throne. Awaken, my descendant, Sparda commanded, his voice echoing like thunder. Cast aside your human limits. Let the demonic blood boil. Show this world the might of the son of Sparda. Sparda drove the flat of the massive blade against the ground. A shockwave of pure, crimson energy erupted across the wasteland, slamming into Izuku. Izuku screamed. It wasn't a scream of pain. It was a scream of release. The lock in his soul shattered. The boiling heat in his veins turned into a raging, nuclear inferno. He felt his bones calcify, his muscles condense, his very DNA rewriting itself in the span of a microsecond. In the real world, the crowd watched in horror as the sludge villain crushed the life out of the two boys. Bakugo's struggles had grown weak. Izuku was completely limp, his eyes closed. Damn it! All Might cursed, gripping his bleeding side, forcing himself to step forward. I have to transform. Even if it kills me. But before All Might could take another step, a sound echoed through the street. It sounded like a heartbeat. Thump thump. The sound was so loud, so resonant, that it rattled the windows of the nearby buildings. The pro-heroes paused. The crowd went silent. Thump thump. Inside the sludge mass, a brilliant, blinding blue light began to emit from Izuku's chest. What the hell? The sludge villain gurgled, looking down at the boy. He's burning! The sludge around Izuku began to hiss, boiling violently. The foul-smelling liquid bubbled and evaporated into thick steam. The villain shrieked in pain, trying to pull away from the green-haired boy, but it found that it couldn't. Izuku's eyes snapped open. They were no longer the soft, frightened emerald green. They were glowing, radiant pools of fierce, piercing blue. A sudden, violent shockwave of azure and crimson lightning erupted from Izuku's body. The force of the blast tore a massive hole in the sludge villain's mass, completely freeing Bakugo, who was sent tumbling onto the pavement, gasping for air. Izuku fell to the ground, landing in a low crouch. The air around him hummed with static electricity. The fires of the shopping district seemed to dim in comparison to the aura radiating from the boy. For a fleeting moment, as the crimson lightning danced across his form, his unruly green hair flashed to a stark, blinding white, before settling back to its natural color. But it was his right arm that drew the horrified, awestruck gazes of everyone present. From his shoulder down to his fingertips, a massive, spectral projection overlaid his physical arm. It was glowing a translucent, neon blue, crackling with demonic energy. It looked like the claw of a beast, thick, armored, and tipped with razor-sharp talons. Izuku stood up slowly. He rolled his shoulders, a sickening crack echoing from his neck. He looked down at his spectral arm, clenching his fist. The ethereal claws responded instantly, tearing the air with a distinct, resonant hum. The fear was gone. The stuttering, terrified boy who had cowered before Bakugo's explosions was dead. In his place stood a predator. And he was riding the greatest adrenaline high of his life. Izuku looked up at the sludge villain, who was rapidly trying to regenerate his lost mass. A slow, arrogant, completely uncharacteristic smirk spread across Izuku's face. What is this? The sludge villain roared, terror dripping from his distorted voice. What kind of quirk is that? Izuku let out a low, dark chuckle. He raised his spectral right hand, pointing a single, glowing blue finger at the massive beast. Quirk? Izuku said. His voice was different. It didn't stutter. It was laced with a terrifying, cocky confidence that bordered on arrogance. You think this is a quirk? You're even dumber than you look, Mudface. Bakugo, watching from the ground, stared in utter disbelief. Deku? What the hell is going on? What is that power? And why is he talking like that? I'll crush you! The sludge villain screamed, whipping 3 massive tentacles of hardened mud toward Izuku with the force of a wrecking ball. Too slow. Izuku didn't just dodge. He vanished. There was a sonic boom, and the pavement where he stood shattered into a spiderweb crater. Izuku reappeared 10 feet in the air, directly above the villain, crimson lightning trailing behind him like a comet. What speed! All Might thought, his jaw dropping. I couldn't even track his movement. Hey! Izuku yelled down from the sky, his grin widening. Get your filthy mud off my classmate, Izuku dove. He didn't use a weapon. He simply thrust his glowing, spectral right hand forward. Buster! The spectral blue hand shot forward, expanding in size until it was as large as a car. The ethereal claws plunged into the center of the sludge villain, completely ignoring the fluid consistency, and grabbed the creature's solid core, the very soul of the beast. No! Let go! The villain shrieked. Going down! Izuku laughed. With a roar of effort, Izuku flexed his arm. He didn't just throw the villain. He violently slammed the entire mass of sludge over his head and into the pavement with world-shattering force. Boom! The impact was apocalyptic. The street caved in, forming a massive crater. A shockwave ripped through the shopping district, blowing out the remaining fires in an instant and shattering every glass window within a 3-block radius. The sheer concussive force caused a massive updraft, sending debris and pulverized concrete flying into the sky. When the dust settled, the silence was absolute. The sludge villain was gone. He wasn't just defeated. He was completely splattered, reduced to thousands of harmless, inert puddles across the entire street. In the center of the crater, amidst the raining debris, stood Izuku Midoriya. His spectral blue arms slowly dissolved into the air like mist, the crimson lightning fading from his skin. The adrenaline crash hit him like a freight train. The arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, confused exhaustion. He blinked, looking at his normal, frail right hand. Did I just do that? Izuku muttered, his voice returning to its normal, squeaky pitch. He looked up. Empty Lady, Kamui Woods, and Death Arms were staring at him with mouths agape. The police officers had dropped their barricades. The crowd was dead silent, staring at the middle schooler who had just unleashed a force of nature. Bakugo was sitting in the rubble, his crimson eyes wide, locked onto Izuku in a mixture of horror, rage, and awe. And in the crowd, a skeletal man with blonde hair gripped the railing, his blue eyes burning with an intensity he hadn't felt in 5 years. Izuku tried to take a step forward, but his legs were gone. The sheer strain of channeling the ancient, demonic bloodline through his untrained mortal body was too much. His eyes rolled back into his head. As he pitched forward into the darkness, the last thing he heard was the deafening roar of the crowd erupting into cheers, and the sound of heavy, frantic footsteps rushing toward him. The transition from unconsciousness to the waking world was not a gentle one. It felt as though someone had replaced Izuku Midoriya's blood with liquid lead, let it cool, and was now forcing him to move his limbs. A sharp, rattling gasp escaped his lips as he shot up in bed, his sheets tangling around his waist. His chest heaved, his hands instinctively flying to his throat, searching for the suffocating, foul-tasting sludge. Instead, his fingers brushed against the soft cotton of his favorite All Might t-shirt. There was no sludge. There was no fire. There was only the quiet hum of the air conditioner, and the amber glow of the late afternoon sun filtering through his bedroom window. Izuku blinked rapidly, his eyes struggling to adjust. He was in his room. The walls, plastered floor to ceiling with posters of the symbol of peace, stared back at him. Dozens of All Might action figures stood in pristine rows on his shelves, their painted-on smiles a stark contrast to the absolute turmoil churning within Izuku's stomach. "I'm home?" he croaked. His voice sounded like sandpaper rubbing against the chalkboard. Slowly, the fragmented memories began to stitch themselves together. The roof. The emaciated form of All Might revealing his crippling injury. The crushing realization that his idol didn't believe in him. The explosion in Tatooine shopping district. Bakugo's terrified eyes. And then, the void. The throne of swords. The towering, terrifying demonic knight who called himself Sparda. Izuku lifted his right hand, staring at his palm. He squeezed it into a fist, half expecting to see that massive, spectral blue claw manifest again. He remembered the feeling of it, the sheer, intoxicating, unadulterated power that had surged through him. It hadn't felt like a quirk. Quirks were biological. They felt like flexing a muscle. This had felt like uncapping a geyser of ancient, volatile magic. It had felt like opening a door that had been locked for thousands of years. He threw off the covers, wincing as a dull ache shot through his ribs, and padded over to the full-length mirror attached to his closet door. He looked different. It was subtle, but to someone who had spent his entire life analyzing every minute detail of heroes and villains, the changes were glaringly obvious. His physique, usually soft and unremarkable, seemed slightly more defined, as if his musculature had condensed and hardened overnight. The dusting of freckles on his cheeks remained, but his eyes, usually a soft, forest green, seemed to carry a faint, luminescent blue ring around the pupils. And then there was his hair. Amidst the unruly mop of dark green curls, a single, stark white streak slashed through the bangs on the right side of his face. It was as white as freshly fallen snow, catching the amber light of the sunset. "It wasn't a dream," Izuku whispered, reaching up to touch the white strand. It felt coarse, thick with static electricity. It actually happened. The sound of a dropped ceramic plate shattering in the hallway made him jump. "Izuku?" The bedroom door creaked open. Inko Midoriya stood in the doorway, her hands trembling, a look of profound shock and sorrow written across her face. Her eyes instantly locked onto the white streak in her son's hair, and a fresh wave of tears cascaded down her cheeks. "Mom?" Izuku took a step forward, his heart clenching at the sight of his mother's distress. "Mom, I'm okay. I promise, the paramedics said I just fainted from exhaustion. There's no permanent damage, the villain didn't." "You woke up," Inko interrupted, her voice barely a whisper. She wasn't talking about him waking from his nap. The sheer weight in those 3 words carried a history Izuku didn't yet understand. She rushed forward, wrapping her arms around him in a vice-like grip, burying her face in his shoulder. She sobbed, her entire body shaking, muttering a string of apologies over and over, just as she had done on that fateful day at the doctor's office 10 years ago. "Mom, please don't cry," Izuku pleaded, hugging her back awkwardly. "I'm sorry I worried you. I know I was reckless running in like that, but Kaken was in trouble, and my legs just moved on their own." Inko pulled back, her tear-stained face looking up at him. She reached a trembling hand to brush the white streak of hair from his forehead. "I saw the news, Izuku. I saw what you did. I saw the arm, the blue light." Izuku swallowed hard. "Mom, I don't know what happened. I think I have a quirk. I think it's just a really late manifestation. Or maybe an extreme stress-induced mutation? I had this vision, and this giant knight." "It is not a quirk, Izuku," Inko said, her voice steadying, carrying a firmness he had rarely heard from her. She took a deep breath, wiping the tears from her eyes. "Sit down. Please." Izuku obeyed, sitting on the edge of his bed, his mind racing. Inko pulled up his desk chair and sat across from him. She looked down at her hands, taking a long moment to collect herself before meeting his gaze. "When you were 4 years old, and the doctor told us you had that extra joint in your toe, he told us you were a genetic throwback. That you were quirkless," Inko began, her voice tinged with a bitterness that was entirely foreign to her. "I let you believe it. I let the world believe it. And for that, I will never, ever forgive myself." "Mom, what are you talking about?" Izuku asked, his pulse quickening. "The X-ray was real. The extra joint is a biological failsafe," Inko interrupted. "A genetic lock, designed to keep a mortal body from tearing itself apart." Izuku stared at her, the words of the demonic knight echoing perfectly in his mind. "Your fragile human genetics suppressed it." "Izuku, what do you know about the origin of quirks?" Inko asked. They originated in Xinjiang City, China," Izuku recited automatically, his analytical mind kicking into gear. "The glowing baby. From there, the phenomenon spread globally. Scientists believe it was a sudden leap in human evolution, a genetic mutation that altered the fundamental biology of humanity." "That is what the textbooks say," Inko nodded slowly. "Because humanity is arrogant. We must put a scientific label on everything to feel safe. But the truth is much older, and far darker." Inko stood up, walking over to Izuku's window and drawing the blinds, casting the room into twilight. Before quirks, before modern civilization, the world was not just inhabited by humans. There was another realm, a mirror to our own, entirely separated from us by an ancient seal. The underworld. Izuku's breath hitched. The underworld. "I am the waking nightmare of the underworld." "Demons," Izuku whispered. Inko nodded gravely. "Yes. 2,000 years ago, the demon Emperor Mundus prepared to invade the human world to enslave it, but one of his top generals, a demonic knight of unimaginable power, woke up to justice. He pitted humanity. He took up his sword, rebelled against his own kind, and single-handedly defeated the Emperor. He sealed the gateway between the realms, saving humanity. His name was Sparda." Izuku's hands gripped the edge of his mattress, his knuckles turning white. The mythological scale of what his mother was saying should have sounded insane. It should have sounded like the plot of a fantasy manga. But he had felt the power. He had seen the throne of swords. He knew, with absolute certainty, that she was telling the truth. "The sealing of the underworld was not a clean process," Inko continued. "When Sparda closed the gates, massive amounts of ambient demonic energy, or magic, were trapped on this side. Over centuries, that residual magic seeped into the earth, into the atmosphere, and eventually into the human genome. It lay dormant for generations until it finally catalyzed, mutating human DNA. Quirks," Izuku breathed out, his eyes wide with realization. "Quirks they're just diluted demonic magic, a highly evolved, scientifically stabilized mutation of it." "Yes," Inko said. "But not everyone in the world possesses a diluted, mutated quirk. Some lineages trace back directly to the source. Inko walked back to the chair and sat down, reaching out to take both of Izuku's hands in hers. Your father, Hisashi, she said, her voice wavering. His quirk registry says he breathes fire. That is a lie. Hisashi Midoriya is one of the last living direct descendants of the Dark Knight Sparda. He doesn't breathe fire. He commands hellfire. Izuku's jaw dropped. Dad is, we are. Descendants of a demon, Inko confirmed, a tear slipping down her cheek. Hisashi's bloodline stems from one of Sparda's twin sons, and down through a man named Nero. The blood of Sparda is dominant. It is a terrifying, overwhelming force of nature. When I became pregnant with you, Hisashi was terrified. He knew that if you inherited the pure demonic blood, living in a modern society of regulated quirks would be impossible. You would be hunted. The government, villains, everyone would want to weaponize you. Is that why he left? Izuku asked, a sharp pang of betrayal hitting his chest. Because I was a monster? No. God, no, Izuku. Inko squeezed his hands tightly. He left to protect us. He went overseas to draw the attention of the remaining cults and underworld remnants away from Japan. He wanted you to have a normal life. And when the doctor told us you were quirkless, we thought it was a miracle. We thought the human side of your DNA had successfully suppressed the Sparda bloodline. We thought you were safe. Inko looked at the white streak in Izuku's hair, her expression one of profound grief. But today, your desire to save Katsuki must have shattered the genetic lock. The adrenaline, the proximity to death. It woke up the demon inside you. You aren't quirkless, Izuku. You never were. You possess a power older and more destructive than any hero on this earth. Silence descended upon the room, heavy and suffocating. Izuku looked at his All Might posters. He had spent his entire life begging to be normal, begging to be a hero like the man on those posters. He had been mocked, beaten, and degraded for being empty, but he wasn't empty. He was a vessel for the apocalypse. I'm a demon, Izuku said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. You are my son, Inko said fiercely, cupping his face. You are Izuku Midoriya. You have the kindest, most gentle heart of anyone I have ever known. Sparda was a demon, yes, but he fought for humanity. He saved the world. Your blood does not dictate your soul, Izuku. Your choices do. Izuku leaned into his mother's touch, closing his eyes as a few stray tears escaped. The weight of the revelation was crushing, yet, paradoxically, liberating. For 10 years, he had believed he was a mistake of nature. Now, he knew he was the heir to a legacy of rebellion. There's something else, Inko said softly, standing up. Your father left something for you, in case this day ever came. Come with me. The pull-down stairs to the attic creaked under Izuku's weight as he followed his mother up into the dusty, low-ceilinged space. The air up here smelled of old cardboard, mothballs, and forgotten memories. The single pull-chain light bulb flickered, casting long, wavering shadows against the slanted roof. Inko navigated through stacks of old photo albums and holiday decorations, making her way to the far corner of the attic. There, hidden beneath a heavy, dust-covered tarp, sat an object that immediately made the hair on the back of Izuku's neck stand up. As Inko pulled the tarp away, Izuku felt a strange, rhythmic thrumming in his chest, as if his heart were trying to synchronize with a phantom beat. Beneath the tarp was a massive, ancient-looking trunk made of dark, heavily lacquered wood, reinforced with bands of rusted iron. Covering the locks and the seams of the chest were dozens of yellow paper talismans, covered in faded, complex calligraphy. Your father shipped this to us shortly after he left, Inko explained, her voice hushed in the dim light. He said it was a family heirloom. It's been sealed with old warding magic to hide its energy signature from anyone who might be looking for it. I don't have the power to break the seals. Izuku stepped forward, drawn to the chest like a magnet. The heat in his veins, the demonic power that had terrified him just hours prior, began to stir warmly. It wasn't angry or violent this time. It felt familiar. Like returning to a childhood home. He reached out his hand. The moment his fingertips brushed the yellow paper talismans, they ignited. There was no heat, no smoke, just a flash of brilliant blue, ethereal flame that instantly consumed the wards, turning them to fine gray ash. The heavy iron locks on the front of the chest, rusted shut for over a decade, unlatched with a loud, resounding clack. Inko took a step back, her hands covering her mouth. Izuku lifted the heavy wooden lid. Inside, resting on a bed of faded red velvet, was a long, heavy bundle wrapped in thick, oil-stained canvas and bound with leather straps. With trembling hands, Izuku reached in and lifted the bundle. It was incredibly heavy, easily weighing over 40 pounds, yet Izuku found he could lift it with relative ease, his newly awakened muscles supporting the weight without strain. He set it down on the wooden floorboards of the attic and began to undo the leather buckles. As the canvas fell away, Izuku gasped. It was a sword. Or rather, the corpse of one. The weapon was a massive great sword, easily 4 feet in length. But it was in a pitiable state. The blade, forged from an unknown, blackened metal, was violently shattered halfway up its length. What remained of the edge was chipped, dull, and marred by deep gouges. But it was the hilt that drew Izuku's eye. It wasn't a traditional cross guard. The grip was fashioned to look like the handlebars of a motorcycle, complete with a brake lever and a twisted, intricate exhaust port built directly into the guard. It looked like a Frankenstein's monster of ancient blacksmithing and modern mechanics. Hisashi called it the Red Queen, Inko whispered, staring at the broken weapon. Or, at least, a replica of it, forged from a fragment of the original Sparda blade, Rebellion. He told me it belonged to your ancestor, Nero. It was shattered in a battle decades ago. He said it was dead. Izuku knelt beside the shattered sword. His analytical mind, ever the dominant force in his personality, immediately kicked in. A sword with an engine. The combustion must have been used to coat the blade in flames or increase the kinetic force of a swing. But the blade is shattered. The internal mechanisms must be rusted shut. It's completely useless as a weapon in this state. Yet the thrumming in his chest was growing louder. A mortal vessel, fragile and unbroken. Sparda's voice echoed in his memory. Izuku reached out and grasped the motorcycle grip of the hilt. The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. A pulse of pure, crimson and neon blue energy surged from Izuku's palm, rushing into the hilt of the sword. The rusted exhaust ports on the crossguard suddenly blasted open with a deafening, mechanical roar. Vroom! The sword revved like a high-performance engine. The sound was deafening in the enclosed attic. Heat radiated from the metal as the internal mechanics, dead for decades, violently forced themselves back to life, fueled not by gasoline, but by raw demonic energy. Izuku gasped, trying to pull his hand away, but the weapon seemed to latch onto his aura. The energy traveled up the blackened metal, reaching the jagged, shattered edge of the blade. Then, the impossible happened. The demonic energy materialized, extending outward from the broken steel, forming a crackling, ethereal blade of pure, concentrated plasma. The spectral edge was a blinding, fiery orange bordered by deep blue, perfectly completing the length of the great sword. The energy hummed and vibrated, casting a fierce, dancing light across the attic walls. Izuku lifted the weapon with one hand. It felt perfectly balanced. It didn't feel like he was holding a piece of steel. It felt like he was holding an extension of his own soul. Izuku. Inko breathed out, her eyes wide with awe. It responded to you. Izuku squeezed the grip, accidentally twisting the throttle on the handle. Vroom vrrr. The exhaust ports shot a jet of blue flame, and the spectral edge of the sword flared violently, burning with intense heat. Izuku quickly released the throttle, his heart pounding a mile a minute. The sheer destructive capability resting in his hand was terrifying, yet exhilarating. It's incredible, Izuku murmured, his eyes reflecting the fiery glow of the blade. It's alive. He commanded the energy to recede. The spectral blade vanished, the engine sputtering to a quiet halt, leaving only the shattered, blackened metal resting in his grip. The connection severed, but the potential remained. He looked up at his mother. The scared, quirkless boy who had cried over a computer screen 10 years ago was gone. In his place was someone new. Someone who had a legacy to uphold. "Ma," Izuku said, his voice resolute, devoid of its usual stutter. "I'm going to master this. I'm going to Yue High. I'm going to be a hero." Inko smiled through her tears, stepping forward and placing a hand on his shoulder. "I know you will, Izuku. I know." 3 days later, the sun was beginning to set over Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. To call it a park was a cruel joke. For years, the local currents had dragged illegal dumping and ocean trash onto the shore, turning the once beautiful beach into a towering, stinking landfill of rusted refrigerators, broken tires, and scrap metal. Izuku stood at the edge of the boardwalk, the sea breeze ruffling his dark green curls and the stark white streak that fell over his right eye. On his back, secured by a thick leather strap he had fashioned himself, rested the wrapped bundle of the shattered Red Queen. He had come here for a reason. He needed an isolated place to test the limits of his new, terrifying biology. He needed to understand the mechanics of his demonic power before the UA entrance exam in 10 months. He couldn't just rely on the explosive, instinctual outburst that had defeated the sludge villain. If he lost control of that power in a crowded room, he could kill someone. Midoriya, my boy. Izuku flinched, spinning around. Standing a few feet away, leaning against the railing of the boardwalk, was the skeletal, incredibly tall figure of Toshinori Yagi. All Might. Izuku's eyes widened. All Might? What are you doing here? How did you find me? I asked the police for your address, and your lovely mother pointed me in this direction. All Might coughed into his fist, a small spatter of blood landing on his sleeve. I've been looking for you since the incident with the sludge villain. I have a lot to apologize for. Izuku stepped back, his hands instinctually moving toward the strap of his sword. The worship he had once held for this man had been heavily complicated by the events of the rooftop. You don't have to apologize. You were right. Without a quirk, running in like that was suicide. All Might shook his head, pushing himself off the railing and stepping closer. No, young man. I was wrong. Of all the people at the scene that day, the pro-heroes, the police, the bystanders, and myself, you were the only one who acted. You, a timid, quirkless boy, charged into a situation we had all given up on. All Might suddenly transformed, his muscles ballooning outward in a cloud of steam, growing into the towering, golden age symbol of peace. You showed me what it means to be a hero. All Might boomed, pointing a massive finger at Izuku. You ignited a fire in my heart that I thought had gone out. And that power you displayed, the blue arm, the sheer strength, it was incredible. A late-blooming quirk of monumental proportions. Izuku looked down at the sand, his jaw tightening. A late-blooming quirk. He doesn't know. Suddenly, All Might shrank back down with a pathetic, wheezing sigh, coughing up a larger amount of blood. Anyway, the point is, I have come to offer you a proposition, Izuku Midoriya. You are worthy. Izuku looked up, confused. Worthy? Worthy of what? Of inheriting my power, All Might said, his blue eyes dead serious. The wind seemed to stop. The sound of the crashing waves faded into the background. Inheriting your power? Izuku repeated, his brain short-circuiting. But quirks can't be inherited. They're genetic. They're locked to your DNA. Normally, yes, All Might explained, stepping forward. But my quirk is a special one. It is a torch, passed on from generation to generation. It is the crystallization of power, stockpiled over decades, and passed to a successor to cultivate. It is called One for All. All Might held out his hand, palm up. I was quirkless too once. I know the pain of being powerless. But I see in you the heart of a true hero. I want you to be my successor, Midoriya. I want to give you One for All. For 10 years, this was the moment Izuku had dreamed of. The number one hero, standing before him, telling him he could be a hero. Offering him the very power that had saved thousands of lives. The ultimate validation. A week ago, Izuku would have fallen to his knees, crying tears of absolute joy, and accepted the offer without a second thought. But as Izuku looked at All Might's outstretched hand, he felt the heavy, comforting weight of the shattered sword on his back. He felt the pulse of the demonic blood in his veins, hot and ancient. Your bloodline has thinned, in you the blood runs thick. If quirks were derived from demonic magic, what would happen if he introduced the pinnacle of human quirk evolution, a stockpiled, supercharged mutation, into a body that was already brimming with volatile, pure demonic energy? The clash of the two forces would be catastrophic. Best case scenario, One for All would overwrite and dilute his family's legacy. Worst case scenario, The collision of pure magic and stockpiled mutation would tear his body apart at the molecular level. But it wasn't just about the physical danger. It was about identity. Sparda had fought for humanity with his own strength. Nero had fought with his own strength. They didn't borrow power to save the world. They conquered it themselves. Izuku looked up at All Might. The fear and insecurity that had plagued him his entire life were gone. His eyes, rimmed with a faint blue glow, were steady and unyielding. Izuku bowed. A deep, respectful, perfect 90-degree bow. I am honored, All Might, Izuku said, his voice ringing clear and strong over the sound of the ocean. More honored than I can possibly express. You have been my idol since I was a child. But, I must decline. All Might physically recoiled, genuine shock registering on his skeletal face. Decline? Young man, do you understand what I am offering you? The power to become the #1 hero. Izuku stood up straight, his hand reaching back to rest on the leather-wrapped hilt of the Red Queen. I understand, Izuku said softly. But the power I used against the sludge villain, it's not a late-blooming quirk. It's an inheritance. A legacy left to me by my father, and his fathers before him. It is a dangerous, violent power, and I barely understand it. But it's mine. Izuku looked out at the ocean, his grip tightening on the sword. If I take your power, I'm throwing away the legacy my family died to protect. I have a duty to master this strength, on my own terms. I will become a hero, All Might. But I will do it as Izuku Midoriya. All Might stared at the boy for a long, silent moment. The symbol of peace had offered the greatest power in the world to a seemingly quirkless teenager, and the teenager had looked him in the eye and said no, not out of arrogance, but out of a profound, unshakable respect for his own identity. A slow, proud smile spread across All Might's face. You truly are a remarkable young man, Midoriya, All Might chuckled, turning away. I see I was right in my judgment of your character, even if my offer was rejected. I look forward to seeing what you will accomplish at UA. Thank you, All Might, Izuku called out. Just promise me one thing. All Might called back over his shoulder. When you reach the top, make sure you smile. Izuku watched the hero walk away until he disappeared down the street. He turned back to the towering piles of garbage on the beach. The UA entrance exam was 10 months away. 10 months to take a body that had been dormant for 14 years and forge it into a weapon capable of wielding the fires of hell. 10 months to master the Red Queen. All right, Izuku muttered to himself, stepping onto the sand. He unstrapped the heavy bundle from his back, letting the canvas fall away. The shattered, blackened greatsword rested heavily in his hands. He closed his eyes, focusing on the feeling he had in the attic. He pictured the demonic energy as a reservoir of molten steel in his chest. He reached down into that reservoir, grabbed a handful of the heat, and pulled it up through his arm. Vroom! The engine in the hilt roared to life, spitting a jet of blue flame from the exhaust. The crackling, ethereal plasma edge materialized from the shattered steel, casting a fierce orange glow over the trash heaps. Izuku swung the weapon. The sheer kinetic force of the revved blade generated a shockwave that blew a massive hole through a pile of rusted washing machines, sending scrap metal flying into the ocean. The recoil nearly dislocated his shoulder. Izuku grunted, stumbling backward, his boots digging into the sand. Okay, Izuku panted, a manic grin spreading across his face. This is going to take a lot of work. The next 10 months were absolute hell. And Izuku loved every second of it. His training regimen was twofold. First, he needed physical conditioning. The demonic energy was a massive multiplier to his base physical stats, but his base stats were garbage. If he tried to channel too much power through weak muscles, he would snap his own bones. So, he took it upon himself to clean Dagoba Beach, lifting refrigerators, hauling tires, and dragging pickup trucks through the deep sand forced his muscles to tear and rebuild at an astonishing rate. His demonic healing factor sped up the recovery, allowing him to train for 12 hours a day without crippling himself. Within 3 months, his soft, rounded physique was gone, replaced by lean, incredibly dense, corded muscle. But the second part of his training was much more complex. He needed to understand his demonic power. Izuku approached it the only way he knew how, through obsessive, meticulous analysis. He bought a new notebook, titled Sparda Legacy, Combat Styles, and treated his own body like a puzzle to be solved. He discovered quickly that his demonic energy operated differently depending on his mindset and intent. If he focused his energy into his legs with the intent to evade, he moved faster than the human eye could track. He called this trickster. It wasn't just speed, it was a localized spatial distortion. He could dash midair, utilizing the demonic energy as a solid platform to kick off of. If he focused the energy outward, creating a dense, invisible barrier of kinetic absorption right as an attack hit him, he could completely negate the damage. He called this Royal Guard. It was insanely difficult to time perfectly, requiring microsecond precision. If he mistimed the block, he took full damage. If he timed it perfectly, he could store the kinetic energy in his body and release it in a devastating counterattack. The strangest part of his training, however, was the psychological shift. Outside of training, Izuku was still Izuku. He was polite, he blushed when girls talked to him at school, he stuttered, and he helped old ladies cross the street. He was a cinnamon roll of a human being. But the moment he gripped the Red Queen, the moment the adrenaline hit his system, and the demonic blood began to pump, a switch flipped. The demonic instinct was fiercely confident, dominant, and relentlessly arrogant. It wasn't an evil presence. It was just the predatory nature of a creature at the absolute top of the food chain. When Izuku fought, the stutter vanished. The shyness evaporated. He found himself smirking, laughing in the face of danger, and taunting the imaginary opponents he fought on the beach. He was essentially chasing a high. He realized that the more creative, fluid, and stylish his combos were, the more freely his demonic energy flowed. Boring, repetitive strikes drained his stamina. Linking a trickster dash into a mid-air Red Queen cleave, followed by a point-blank blast of demonic fire, made him feel invincible. It was mid-February, the morning of the UA entrance exam. The sun crested over the horizon, illuminating Dagoba Beach. Except, it wasn't a landfill anymore. The towering piles of trash, the rusted cars, the broken appliances, they were all gone. The white sand stretched perfectly clean to the pristine, rolling waves of the ocean. Izuku stood at the center of the beach, his chest heaving with exertion. Sweat dripped from his chin, his green curls plastered to his forehead, the white streak gleaming in the morning light. He wore a simple white t-shirt, completely soaked through, and a pair of cargo pants. In his right hand he held the Red Queen. The engine was purring quietly, the spectral plasma blade humming with latent power. He had done it. He had cleared the beach, and in doing so, he had forged his body into a vessel capable of holding the Sparda legacy. He tightened his grip on the motorcycle hilt, rolling his shoulders. The demonic energy in his veins felt calm, completely under his control, waiting for his command to unleash hell. Showtime, Izuku whispered to the wind. He disengaged the spectral blade, the plasma vanishing into the rusted steel. He wrapped the heavy canvas around the sword, buckled the leather straps, and slung the heavy weapon over his back. He turned away from the ocean and began the walk toward UA High School. He didn't know what the exam would entail. He didn't know what kind of quirks he would face, but as the heavy, comforting weight of the Red Queen rested against his spine, Izuku Midoriya smiled. A genuine, fearless, wildly confident smirk. Let them bring their quirks. Let them bring their robots, their tests, and their heroes. He was going to show them a hell of a time. The morning air of late February was crisp, carrying the faint, lingering chill of winter, yet beneath the pale blue sky, the sun shone with an unapologetic brightness. It was the kind of morning that felt heavy with consequence. For thousands of middle school students across Japan, this was the day that would define the rest of their lives. Izuku Midoriya stood at the bottom of the long, sloping pathway leading to the main gates of UA High School. The sheer scale of the architecture was staggering. The towering, H-shaped glass structures gleamed in the sunlight, casting long, imposing shadows over the beautifully manicured courtyards. This was the Mecca of heroism. This was the place where legends like Endeavor, Best Jeanist, and All Might himself had forged their destinies. And now, Izuku was here. He took a deep, trembling breath, the chilled air filling his lungs. He was dressed in his middle school uniform, but secured tightly to his back via a thick, custom-made leather harness was a massive, rectangular bundle. Heavy, oil-stained canvas wrap concealed the shattered, rusted remnants of the Red Queen, bound tightly with thick leather straps. The immense weight of the broadsword, easily over 40 pounds, pressed against his spine. 10 months ago, carrying such a burden would have driven him to his knees in seconds. Today, it felt like a comforting embrace. It grounded him. Okay, Izuku whispered to himself, his hands balling into fists at his sides. 10 months of literal blood, sweat, and tears. You cleaned the beach. You learned to channel the energy. You didn't blow yourself up. You can do this. Just act natural. Out of my way, Deku! The harsh, abrasive bark shattered Izuku's fragile calm. He flinched, instinctively taking a half-step to the side as Katsuki Bakugo stormed past him. The explosive blonde was hunched forward, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his crimson eyes glaring daggers at the towering school building. Keikaken! Izuku squeaked, his voice cracking slightly. Bakugo didn't even stop walking. He just cast a disdainful, sidelong glance over his shoulder. Don't stand in front of me. I'll kill you. And what the hell is that giant piece of garbage on your back? You brought luggage to a practical exam? You really are a brain-dead extra. Izuku's hands immediately flew up in a placating gesture. It's not garbage. It's a support item. F for my quirk. I submitted the paperwork and everything, Bakugo scoffed, a tiny plume of smoke escaping his nostrils. Support item for a quirk you don't have. Whatever. Just stay out of my sight before I blow you to ash. With that, Bakugo continued his march toward the entrance, leaving Izuku standing on the pavement. Izuku exhaled a long breath, letting his arms drop. The fear was still there, a conditioned reflex ingrained into him since childhood. But it was duller now. The suffocating terror that used to grip his heart whenever Bakugo raised his voice had been replaced by a quiet, steady thrumming beneath his ribs. It was the demonic blood, recognizing a threat, but dismissing it as insignificant. He barks loudly, a dark, arrogant corner of his mind whispered. Let him bark. Shaking his head to clear the intrusive, confident thought, Izuku adjusted the straps of his harness and took a step forward. All right. Step 1. Walk through the gates. He lifted his right foot, brought it down, and immediately snagged his toe on a raised, uneven paving stone. Time seemed to slow down. Izuku's center of gravity pitched violently forward. The heavy sword strapped to his back only accelerated his momentum. No! Not now! Of all the times to be hopelessly clumsy, why now? I'm going to faceplant on the very first day. I'll be the kid who knocked himself out before the exam even started. He squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable, humiliating impact with the concrete. But the impact never came. Instead, a strange, weightless sensation washed over him. The wind stopped rushing past his ears. He cracked one eye open and realized he was suspended mid-air, hovering mere inches above the pavement, his arms flailing comically. Are you okay? A cheerful, melodic voice asked. Izuku gasped, twisting his head around to see a girl with short, bobbed brown hair and large, perpetually bright eyes. She had one hand lightly touching his shoulder, while the other was held up with her fingers pressed together. It's my quirk, the girl said with a bright smile. She carefully grabbed Izuku by the shoulders and tilted him backward until his feet touched the ground. She pressed her fingertips together again, and the sudden, grounding force of gravity slammed back into Izuku's body. Sorry for using it on you without asking, but it would be a bad omen to trip and fall right before the exam, wouldn't it? Izuku's brain completely short-circuited. A girl. A girl is talking to me. A very pretty girl just saved me from a concussion. She touched my shoulder. Will. Izuku stammered, his face erupting into a furious, glowing shade of red. He waved his arms wildly, his vocal cords failing to produce anything resembling human speech. Thank you. Sorry. This is all so nerve-wracking, isn't it? She laughed lightly, completely unfazed by his social ineptitude. She pumped her fist in the air. Well, let's both do our best. See you later. She turned and trotted off toward the auditorium, leaving Izuku standing completely frozen on the pathway. I just talked to a girl. Izuku thought, his internal monologue screaming with triumph. Well, she talked to me, and I made unintelligible noises, but still. A conversation. Smiling like an absolute idiot, Izuku marched forward, entirely forgetting about the heavy, rusted demon sword strapped to his back. For the moment, he was just Izuku Midoriya, a nervous, entirely ordinary boy. The massive lecture hall was packed to the brim. Thousands of prospective students sat in tiered seating, the air thick with nervous tension and whispered conversations. The lights were dimmed, focusing all attention on the brightly lit stage at the front of the room. Izuku sat in the middle row, clutching his burnt, water-damaged hero analysis for the future notebook. The canvas-wrapped sword was resting horizontally across his lap, taking up the entirety of his personal space. Bakugo was sitting to his right, radiating a quiet, murderous aura, but Izuku barely noticed. His fanbase senses were currently overriding everything else. Welcome to today's live performance. A booming, electrified voice echoed through the PA system. Spotlights converged on a tall man standing at a podium. He had long, spiked blonde hair, a thin mustache, and was wearing a black leather jacket with a high collar and a directional speaker mounted around his neck. Everybody say hey. Absolute, dead silence filled the room. The pro hero didn't miss a beat. That's the spirit, listeners. I'm the voice hero, Present Mike. I'm here to present the guidelines for your practical exam. Are you ready? Again, utter silence. Izuku, however, was vibrating in his seat. It's the voice hero, Present Mike, he muttered rapidly under his breath, his eyes wide with adoration. I listen to his radio show every week. All the UA teachers are pro-heroes, of course, but it's so surreal seeing him in person. His quirk voice allows him to amplify his vocal cords to devastating levels. Shut up, Bakugo growled, not looking at him. Izuku instantly clamped his hands over his mouth. As it says in the application requirements, Present Mike continued, a massive screen behind him lighting up with a retro, 8-bit video game graphic. You listeners will be conducting 10-minute mock urban battles after this. You can bring whatever you want with you. After the presentation, you'll head to the specified battle center. Izuku looked down at his printout. I'm in Battle Center B. I'm in A, Bakugo noted, glancing at Izuku's card. They're splitting us up so we can't work together with our friends. Why yeah, Izuku swallowed. Or so you can't blast me into orbit before the exam starts. 3 different types of foe villains are stationed in each battle center. Present Mike announced as silhouettes of robots appeared on the screen. You earn points for each of them based on their difficulty level. Your goal, dear listeners, is to use your quirks to earn points by immobilizing the foe villains. Of course, attacking other examinees and any other unheroic actions are strictly prohibited. Excuse me. May I ask a question? A tall, broad-shouldered boy with dark blue hair and glasses stood up in the front row. He raised his hand rigidly, his posture impeccably straight. Without waiting for permission, a spotlight snapped onto him. On the printout, there are 4 types of villains. The boy projected, his voice echoing cleanly without a microphone. If this is a misprint, then UA, the most prominent school in Japan, should be ashamed of that foolish mistake. We examinees are here in this place because we wish to be molded into exemplary heroes. Izuku shrank down in his seat. The boy was intense. Suddenly, the boy spun around, pointing directly at Izuku. In addition, you over there with the curly hair and the giant package on your lap. The boy barked. You've been muttering this entire time. It's distracting. If you're here on a pleasure trip, then you should leave immediately. Several students in the surrounding rows snickered. Izuku felt his face burn with embarrassment. He ducked his head, covering his face with his hands. I'm sorry, he whispered into his palms. Bakugo clicked his tongue. TCH. Pathetic. All right, examinee number 7111. Present Mike interjected, waving his hands to diffuse the tension. Thanks for the great message. The 4th type of villain is worth 0 points. That guy's an obstacle, so to speak. There's one in every battle center. It's not impossible to defeat, but there's no reason to defeat it either. I recommend you listeners try to avoid it. The blue-haired boy bowed perfectly. Thank you very much. Please excuse the interruption. He sat back down. Izuku let out a long breath, slowly lowering his hands. His heart was hammering against his ribs. The anxiety was threatening to drown him. He was surrounded by people with incredible, flashy quirks, people with confidence, people who belonged here. He was a quirkless nobody carrying a broken sword. What if the demonic power didn't activate? What if he just stood there with a rusted piece of metal while robots tore him apart? His right hand drifted down, slipping beneath the edge of the canvas wrapping on his lap. His fingertips brushed the cold, scarred metal of the motorcycle grip. Instantly, a warm, resonant pulse washed up his arm. It was like a heartbeat. The thrum of ancient magic. Calm down, the silent, phantom instinct seemed to whisper in his mind. They are sheep. We are the wolf. Let them boast. Izuku closed his eyes. The suffocating anxiety receded, pushed back by the sheer, overwhelming confidence of the Sparda bloodline. He didn't just have a quirk. He had an apocalypse resting in his hands. That's all from me. President Mike shouted, striking a dramatic pose. Finally, I'll give you listeners a present, our school motto. The hero Napoleon Bonaparte once said, a true hero is one who overcomes life's misfortunes. Go beyond. Plus Ultra. Battle Center B was not a mere training ground. It was an entire mock city block. Towering skyscrapers, paved roads, traffic lights, and alleys stretched out behind a set of colossal metal gates. It was a testament to the sheer, absurd wealth and resources of UA High School. Dozens of examinees stood nervously in the staging area before the closed gates. Most were stretching, adjusting their custom support gear, or hyping themselves up. Izuku stood near the back of the crowd. He had changed into his dark green athletic tracksuit. He reached behind him and began to undo the heavy leather buckles of the canvas wrap. The heavy fabric fell away, revealing the Red Queen in all its battered, rusted glory. He unclipped the custom magnetic sheath he had built from scrap metal at the beach, securing it to the leather harness on his back, and locked the broken great sword into place. The hilt rested over his right shoulder, perfectly positioned for a quick draw. A few examinees nearby turned to look at him, their expressions morphing into blatant confusion. Is that guy carrying a piece of scrap metal? A boy with a lizard mutation whispered to his friend. Looks like a broken sword, the friend snickered. What's he going to do with that? Give the robots tetanus? And what's with the motorcycle handle? What a weirdo. Izuku heard them. But strangely, the civilian side of his brain didn't panic. The moment the canvas had fallen away, exposing the weapon to the air, the psychological shift had begun. The air around Izuku felt suddenly heavy. The ambient temperature in his immediate vicinity spiked. The blood in his veins began to boil, not with anger, but with an intoxicating, electric anticipation. He cracked his neck, the sound sharp in the quiet murmur of the crowd. He closed his eyes. Thump thump. The demonic energy surged from his heart, flowing through his vascular system like liquid fire. It saturated his muscles, condensing his physical form. He felt his senses sharpened to a razor's edge. He could hear the hum of the electrical generators inside the mock city. He could feel the vibrations of the massive faux villains standing by in the streets. When he opened his eyes, the soft, nervous forest green was gone. A vibrant, glowing ring of piercing neon blue encompassed his pupils. The stark white streak in his dark hair seemed to catch the sunlight, practically glowing with static charge. The corner of his mouth twitched upward into a slow, dangerously arrogant smirk. Let's rock. High above the gates, on a massive viewing platform, President Mike leaned into his microphone. Right, let's start. The crowd of examinees flinched, looking up in confusion. What's wrong? President Mike yelled. There are no countdowns in a real battle. Run, run, run! The die has been cast. The colossal metal gates began to slowly grind open. The other examinees hesitated for a fraction of a second, processing the sudden start. Izuku did not hesitate. He didn't just run. He funneled a concentrated burst of demonic energy into his calves. The technique he had spent months perfecting at the beach. Trickster. Boom! The concrete beneath Izuku's boots shattered, a shockwave of displaced air kicking up a cloud of dust over the examinees in the back row. Izuku vanished from his spot, leaving behind only a fading trail of crimson lightning. He shot through the opening gates like a cannonball, entirely bypassing the front runners in a fraction of a second. Whoa! What was that? Did someone teleport? Izuku was already a full city block deep before the others had even crossed the threshold. The wind screamed in his ears, his demonic vision tracking every alleyway, every shadow. He skidded to a halt in the center of a four-way intersection. His boots tore gouges into the asphalt as he stopped his momentum. From the shadows of the adjacent streets, 3 massive, tank-like robots rolled out. They had single, glowing red eyes and heavy treads. Painted on their chassis was the number 3. Target acquired. The robots synthesized in unison, raising heavy, pneumatic cannons attached to their arms. Commencing extermination. Izuku didn't run for cover. He didn't brace for impact. He just stood there, resting his right hand casually on the motorcycle grip protruding from over his shoulder. 3 3-pointers, Izuku chuckled, his voice dropping into a dark, confident timbre. Not a bad appetizer. The robots fired. 3 massive, rubber-tipped missiles shot toward him at blinding speed. Izuku moved. He drew the Red Queen with a violent upward slash. As the rusted metal cleared its sheath, Izuku squeezed the throttle on the hilt. Vroom! The deafening roar of a supercharged engine echoed off the skyscrapers. A jet of blue flame erupted from the exhaust ports on the crossguard. In an instant, the demonic energy surged up the shattered steel, extending outward into a blinding, 4-foot blade of fiery orange and neon blue plasma. The ambient heat instantly vaporized the moisture in the air. With a flick of his wrist, Izuku batted the 3 incoming missiles away as if they were slow-moving baseballs. The plasma blade sheared through the rubber and metal, detonating the projectiles midair. Through the smoke of the explosions, Izuku locked eyes with the center robot. Stinger. Izuku channeled his energy, pushing his limits. He stepped forward and lunged. The movement was so fast it broke the sound barrier with a sharp crack. He crossed the 50-foot distance instantaneously, thrusting the revving sword straight forward. The Red Queen pierced the heavily armored chassis of the 3-pointer as if it were made of wet tissue paper. The immense kinetic force of the thrust didn't just impale the robot. It caused the entire machine to explode outward in a shower of sparks and shredded metal. 3 points. An internal counter clicked in Izuku's mind. But more importantly, a strange, phantom sensation arose. A feeling of rhythm. A mental ranking of his performance. Dismal. Just a single thrust. Boring. Needs more flair. The other 2 robots swiveled their turrets toward him, their mechanical gears whining. Izuku ripped his sword from the wreckage, revving the engine twice in rapid succession. Vroom vroom. The plasma blade flared, burning white-hot. He dashed backward using Trickster, leaving an afterimage as the robots fired at the empty space. While in midair, Izuku threw his left hand forward. Instead of his sword, he channeled the Sparda energy into a raw, magical construct. 3 ethereal, glowing blue daggers materialized in the air around him and shot forward like bullets, impaling the optical sensors of the left robot, blinding it. Blind firing is a bad habit. Izuku taunted, laughing as he landed. He sprinted toward the blind robot, leapt high into the air, and flipped perfectly over it. As he was upside down, he swung the Red Queen in a wide, horizontal arc. Aerial rave! The fiery blade cleaved the top half of the robot clean off. The severed metal crashed to the ground, the internal wiring bursting into flames. 6 points. See, crazy. Better. Keep the flow going. The final 3-pointer recalibrated, locking onto Izuku as he landed. It didn't fire its cannon. Instead, it charged, attempting to run him over with its heavy treads. Izuku didn't dodge. He stood his ground, letting the massive machine bear down on him. At the absolute last possible microsecond, just as the reinforced bumper was about to crush him, Izuku crossed his arms over his chest and shifted his stance. Royal Guard. A microscopic, invisible sphere of immensely dense demonic energy flared around his body. The robot slammed into him at 40 miles per hour. There was a deafening clang. Izuku didn't budge a single millimeter. His boots remained perfectly planted on the asphalt. The sheer kinetic force of the robot's charge was entirely absorbed by the demonic barrier, completely halting the machine's momentum. The robot's engine whined in protest, its treads spinning uselessly against the pavement. Izuku felt the absorbed kinetic energy pooling in his chest, hot and violent, begging to be released. He smirked, dropping his guard and reeling his right fist back. The demonic power channeled into his knuckles, glowing with a terrifying crimson light. Return to sender. Release. Izuku punched the thick armor plating of the robot. The absorbed kinetic energy, multiplied by his own demonic strength, exploded outward. The punch caved in the entire front of the robot, sending a shockwave through the chassis that blew out its back panels. The machine was violently launched 50 feet down the street, tumbling end over end before crashing into a building. 9 points. B. Badass. Now we're talking. Izuku rested the Red Queen on his shoulder, the plasma blade humming pleasantly next to his ear. He looked down the street. The other examinees were finally pouring into the area, their quirks activating as they engaged the lower-tier robots. Hey, don't hog them all! A boy with hardening skin yelled, punching a one-pointer. Izuku let out a breathless, exhilarated laugh. The adrenaline was intoxicating. He felt alive. For the first time in his entire life, he didn't feel broken. He felt perfect. Hog them? Izuku shouted back, his voice dripping with playful arrogance. You gotta be quicker than that, pal. The party's just getting started. He revved the sword again, the engine roaring, and dashed into the thick of the mock city. High above the battle centers, in a darkened, multi-monitor observation room, the faculty of UA High Schools sat in silence, watching the carnage unfold. Pro-heroes, legends in their own right, sat at the tiered desks, their eyes glued to the dozens of screens displaying the examinees. Midnight, Snipe, Ectoplasm, and Cementos watched the various sectors, making notes on clipboards. In the center of the room, sitting in a plush leather chair, was the principal of UA, a strange chimera creature known as Niza. Standing slightly off to the side, wearing his oversized yellow suit and maintaining his skeletal form, was Tashinori Yagi, All Might. In this practical exam, the examinees have not been informed of the number of villains or their locations, Niza stated, sipping tea from a small porcelain cup. They have a limited amount of time in a vast area. They must draw out the villains and process the information quickly. Mobility, intelligence, and sheer combat ability. It is a solid test of their foundational skills. We've got a good crop this year, Midnight purred, tapping a screen displaying Katsuki Bakugo. The blonde boy was launching himself through the air with explosions, ruthlessly destroying robots with terrifying precision. Look at the aggression on examinee 405. He's practically a villain himself, but his combat instincts are flawless. There's another one to watch, Snipe pointed out, adjusting his cowboy hat. He gestured to a screen showing Battle Center B. Examinee 711. The kid with the sword. All eyes shifted to the monitor. The screen showed Izuku Midoriya in midair. He was surrounded by 4 two-pointers. He didn't look panicked. He looked like he was dancing. He twisted his body, using his spectral daggers to pin one robot to the ground, while simultaneously bringing his massive, glowing plasma sword down on another in a devastating overhead cleave. Helm breaker! The audio feed caught him shouting. The sword smashed through the robot, the impact creating a localized shockwave that knocked the remaining 2 machines off balance. Izuku landed, revved the engine on the hilt, and spun like a top, unleashing a 360-degree wave of fire that incinerated the downed robots. Good lord, Ectoplasm muttered. What kind of quirk is that? Some sort of energy construct manipulation? And what is that weapon? It looks like a hybrid support item. Wait a minute, a tired, drawling voice spoke from the corner of the room. Shota Aizawa, the underground hero Eraserhead, sat wrapped in his yellow sleeping bag, his eyes narrowed at his tablet. He scrolled through the examinee registry. Midoriya Izuku. Middle School, Aldera Junior High. Quirk registration. Aizawa paused, his brow furrowing deeply. Quirkless. The room went dead silent. Quirkless? Snipe repeated incredulously. Eraser, look at the screen. The kid just teleported behind a 3-pointer, blocked a missile with his bare hands, and sliced a tank in half with a flaming laser sword. That is not a quirkless teenager. I am aware of what my eyes are showing me, Aizawa retorted flatly. I'm reading the official registry. It says he was diagnosed with the extra toe joint. He is biologically quirkless. A late bloomer, perhaps? Midnight suggested. Or maybe an extreme mutation that didn't activate until recently? The registry might just be outdated. Aizawa unzipped his sleeping bag and stood up, walking over to the main console. He typed a few commands, bringing up a thermal and biometric scan of Battle Center B. Look at the energy output. Aizawa pointed to Izuku's thermal signature. It wasn't glowing like the other students who were using quirks. Instead of a localized heat source in the brain or limbs, Izuku's entire body was radiating a terrifyingly dense, ancient-feeling energy signature that spiked wildly with every swing of his sword. Our sensors are designed to track biological quirk factors, Aizawa explained, his voice laced with genuine confusion. The kid is generating enough power to level a city block, but the system isn't registering it as a quirk. It's reading it as an unknown external radiation, yet it's coming from inside his own cells. It defies every law of quirk biology. All Might, standing in the shadows, remained silent. He watched the screen intensely. He told me it was an inheritance. A legacy left by his father. A dangerous, violent power. My God, he wasn't exaggerating. The boy fights like a seasoned veteran. No, not a veteran. He fights like a demon. Well, whatever his power is, it is certainly impressive, Nizu chirped, breaking the tension. He set his teacup down and hopped onto the control console. He has already accumulated 45 villain points. He's tied for second place with the explosive boy in Center A. But, Nizu reached out a paw, hovering over a massive, plastic-covered red button on the console. True heroism is not just about racking up points against fodder, Nizu smiled, a slightly sadistic glint in his black eyes. Let's see how our prospective heroes handle a true crisis. It is time to deploy the ultimate obstacle. Nizu slammed his paw down on the button. Izuku slid across the asphalt, his boots smoking as he came to a halt. He swung the Red Queen outward, flicking the lingering oil and robot coolant from the spectral blade. 48 points. Apocalyptic. Man, I am on fire. He was breathing heavily, sweat stinging his eyes, but the demonic energy was a relentless battery keeping his muscles from failing. He looked around. The street was littered with the burning, sliced, and crushed remains of foe villains. The other examinees in his vicinity had stopped fighting and were just watching him in stunned silence. Izuku chuckled, resting the sword on his shoulder. What's wrong, guys? The exam's not over yet. Don't tell me you're getting tired. The earth violently shuddered. Izuku stumbled, his demonic balance failing for a second as a massive, localized earthquake rocked the mock city. Buildings groaned, glass shattered, and the asphalt beneath their feet cracked and buckled. What is that? A student screamed, pointing down the main avenue. A shadow fell over the city blocks. At the far end of the street, a structure was moving. No, it wasn't a structure. It was a machine. It was easily the size of a skyscraper. Its massive, tank-like treads crushed entire buildings as it rolled forward. Its gargantuan arms swung, casually obliterating the architecture on either side of the street. It had a towering, humanoid torso, and its singular optical sensor burned with a terrifying, blood-red light. The zero-pointer! Someone yelled. It's huge! Run! Panic erupted instantly. The confident examinees, who had been bravely fighting the smaller robots moments ago, broke into a dead sprint in the opposite direction. It was human nature. Faced with an insurmountable, catastrophic threat, the flight response took over completely. Izuku stood frozen in the center of the street, his glowing blue eyes wide as he stared up at the mechanical titan. His analytical brain fired instantly. It's a walking natural disaster. It's heavily armored. The sheer weight alone makes it a lethal threat. President Mike said it was an obstacle to be avoided. There's no point in fighting it. The logical choice is to retreat and secure my current points. The demonic instinct in his blood, however, scoffed. Run? From a piece of moving scrap metal? Foolishness. We bow to nothing. Izuku gripped the hilt of the Red Queen with both hands. The engine idled loudly. The two sides of his personality were clashing, stalling him in place. Run! His human side screamed. Destroy it! The demon roared. Before either side could win the internal debate, a sound pierced through the chaos of grinding metal and fleeing footsteps. Ow, it hurts! Izuku's head snapped to the left. Near the edge of the street, trapped beneath a massive slab of concrete rubble that had fallen from a destroyed building, was the brown-haired girl who had saved him from falling at the gates. She was struggling desperately, using her quirk to try and lighten the rubble, but she was pinned in an awkward position, unable to get proper leverage, and the zero-pointer's colossal tread was rolling directly toward her. Izuku didn't think. The analytical brain shut off. The demonic pride quieted. What remained was the core of his very soul. The heart of a hero. Thump thump. The demonic power in his veins did not resist. Instead, it roared in absolute, terrifying approval. This was the legacy of Sparda. Power used to protect the weak. Izuku tightened his grip on the Red Queen. He didn't retreat. He assumed a low, aggressive stance, pointing the tip of the spectral blade directly at the colossal machine. "Hey, ugly!" Izuku screamed, his voice a perfect, unified blend of Izuku Midoriya's heroic desperation and the Sparda bloodline's arrogant fury. "Looking for a fight?" The other fleeing examinees stopped, looking back in absolute horror. "What is he doing?" The blue-haired boy with glasses shouted from the retreating crowd. "He's going to get himself killed." "Run, you fool!" Izuku ignored them. He squeezed the motorcycle throttle. He didn't just rev it once. He revved it 3 times in rapid succession, pulling the clutch with perfect timing. Vroom! 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 It was a technique he had barely mastered at the beach. Max act? The engine shrieked, threatening to tear itself apart. The exhaust ports didn't just spit fire, they erupted into twin geysers of blinding blue plasma. The spectral edge of the sword didn't just glow, it turned completely white-hot, radiating a heat so intense it melted the asphalt around Izuku's boots. Izuku funneled every single ounce of his demonic power into his legs. The blue light in his eyes flared so brightly they resembled stars. "Trickster!" Izuku vanished. He didn't just break the sound barrier, he shattered it. A shockwave rippled out from his starting position, knocking the nearby examinees off their feet. He reappeared 20 feet in the air, directly in the path of the giant robot. He didn't fall. He concentrated his energy into the soles of his boots, forming an invisible, solid platform of magic in the air. Bam! He kicked off the air itself, launching himself higher. Bam! 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 To the onlookers below, it looked like Izuku was ascending an invisible staircase, zigzagging higher and higher at impossible speeds, trailing a massive ribbon of crimson lightning and white-hot fire. He scaled the entire height of the zero-pointer in 3 seconds. He reached the apex of his jump, suspended directly in front of the massive, glowing red optical sensor of the robot's face. For a fraction of a second, time seemed to freeze. Izuku hung in the air, the massive robot completely filling his field of vision. The heat of the sword was scorching his own skin, the demonic power threatening to tear his muscles to shreds. But he didn't care. Jackpot! Izuku roared. He brought the Red Queen down in a massive, overhead vertical swing. Drive! The white-hot blade struck the reinforced steel plating of the robot's face. For a millisecond, the steel held. Then, the immense, concentrated demonic energy of the Max Act unleashed itself. A colossal wave of pure, devastating plasma erupted from the blade. The energy wave didn't just cut the robot, it cleaved entirely through it. The massive shockwave traveled down the center of the machine, bisecting the thick armor plating, the internal wiring, and the main power core as easily as a hot knife through butter. The sheer concussive force of the strike split the clouds above the mock city, creating a massive, localized clearing in the sky. The 2 halves of the zero-pointer sparked violently. The red optical sensor flickered and died. With an apocalyptic groan of tearing metal, the colossal machine fell backward, the 2 halves splitting apart, and crashing into the empty city blocks behind it. The impact sent a massive dust cloud rolling through the streets. Izuku hung in the air for a moment, his chest heaving, the Red Queen sputtering as the Max Act charge completely depleted. The spectral blade vanished, leaving only the rusted, blackened steel. Smoke in sexy style. His internal monologue cheered, completely exhausted. Gravity suddenly reasserted its dominance. Izuku began to plummet toward the earth. He had completely drained his demonic stamina. He couldn't manifest the trickster platforms to step down safely. The ground was rushing up to meet him at terrifying speed. Oh crap, oh crap, oh crap. The civilian Izuku panicked, his arms flailing. I'm gonna break my legs. I'm gonna break everything. In a last-ditch effort, he gripped the hilt with both hands, aimed the sword at the ground, and squeezed the throttle with whatever dregs of energy he had left. Vroom, pft. The engine sputtered, coughing out a small, pathetic burst of blue flame. It wasn't much, but it was just enough to act as a weak thruster. It slowed his descent slightly, but not entirely. Izuku hit the ground hard. He rolled violently, tumbling across the asphalt before finally skidding to a halt, flat on his back, staring up at the newly cleared blue sky. Silence descended over Battle Center B. The only sound was the crackle of localized fires from the destroyed robots, and the settling dust. Down the street, the brown-haired girl pushed the rubble off herself. The shockwave from Izuku's attack had shattered the concrete slab trapping her, rendering it light enough for her to move. She stared at the bisected remains of the zero-pointer, her jaw hanging slack. The other examinees slowly crept out from behind their cover. They looked at the destroyed Titan, then turned their gaze to the boy lying in the center of the street. Did he just one-shot the zero-pointer? The lizard boy whispered, his voice trembling. With a piece of scrap metal? Izuku groaned, his entire body screaming in agony. The demonic blood was receding, going dormant to heal the micro-tears in his muscles. As the power faded, so did the intoxicating confidence. The vibrant blue rings faded from his eyes, leaving only the soft forest green. The white streak in his hair lost its static charge, falling limply over his forehead. Izuku slowly sat up, wincing as he clutched his ribs. He looked around, suddenly realizing that dozens of people were staring at him with absolute, terrified awe. The switch flipped. He was no longer the arrogant son of Sparda. He was Izuku Midoriya, the deeply anxious, socially awkward middle schooler. Oh my gosh! Izuku squeaked, his face instantly turning the color of a ripe tomato. He scrambled to his knees, frantically waving his hands in a placating gesture, completely abandoning his sword on the ground. I am so sorry. I didn't mean to cause a scene. Was it too loud? I didn't steal anyone's points, right? I just saw she was trapped, and I panicked, and I just swung my sword and, time's up. President Mick's voice blared over the speakers, effectively cutting off Izuku's panicked rambling. The exam was over. Izuku slumped his shoulders, letting out a massive sigh of relief. He looked down at his hands. They were blistered and shaking, but they were whole. He had done it. He had survived. He reached over, picked up the heavy, rusted hilt of the Red Queen, and secured it to his back. As he stood up, he felt the eyes of the other students still burning into him. He kept his head down, desperately avoiding eye contact, and shuffled toward the exit gates. I think I passed, Izuku thought, a small, genuine smile breaking through his embarrassment. I really think I passed. High in the observation room, Eraserhead stared at the monitor displaying the trembling, blushing boy. He looked back at his quirk registry tablet. Midoriya Izuku. Quirkless. Aizawa narrowed his eyes, a small, terrifying grin forming beneath his capture scarf. This kid, Aizawa muttered, is going to be an absolute headache.